let's do some intros. Dan and Adam, can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into the property industry? Adam, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. So I became an estate agent straight out of school at 17 years old, and worked in a traditional high street estate agency, kind of learning the ropes from making the teas and coffees up to viewings and valuations, and then eventually running a branch. And set up on my own originally in 2013 with the view of trying to create kind of a more modern version of a estate agency, which in that form at that time meant just not being on the high street and leaning into digital marketing and utilising the internet, which is obviously a pretty obvious thing to say now, but back then there was a real expectation that high street should be on the high street. Estate agents should be on the high street. And over time that's now evolved into what we call a brokerage. So instead of having different high street or different office locations in towns that we operate in, we've got different agents that specialise in kind of their local market. They're the go-to kind of expert for the area that they've perhaps already worked in or live in, and as well as kind of being that kind of local expert, they're also effectively business owners running a business under our brand, under Hortons, as a licensee, allowing them kind of greater autonomy and flexibility. But particularly from the client's perspective, it creates much greater accountability because you've got one person that's there taking you through every stage of the process of moving, where the traditional branch network and traditional estate agency system means that there's multiple points of contact and you pass from person to person, and it's much easier to kind of lose that sense of accountability with one person who takes ownership of a client's sale. So as a result, we've grown quite quickly over the past few years, and something that has led us to getting involved in this event is in the past couple of years we've really focused on working with property developers. We've got another kind of sister company to Hortons which specialises in the marketing of new build homes, and we're trying to shake things up in a similar way in that market.
Thanks, Adam. Dan?
Yeah, similar story to start out with. I don't know if I need the microphone or not. I left school, started off as a civil engineer working in Nottingham. Did that for about 7-8 years before I then decided it was much more fun to be the other side of the fence and be the person giving out the instructions. So then I moved into a residential developer in Lincolnshire that's called Larkfleet, now called Allison Homes. And then 5 years ago, just before COVID, I joined Persimmon as their managing director. Persimmon, for those of you that don't know us, are in Weldon at Corby, and it feels like pretty much everywhere in between. So yeah, we're looking at diversifying as we move forward, taking on the challenges that are being thrown at us from recent budget and things like that, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But trying to get ourselves back to that point where we can deliver as a general region 600 to 700 units per year.
And how are you seeing the housing market then, Dan? Macro?
I was saying to my table when we were sat down, post-COVID, we had a bit of a false dawn of, we were selling probably 25 a week for a couple of months. Had a lot of stock that were built up through COVID. And then since then, we've had a few bumps in the road. We're steady at the moment where I'm working out of 8 live developments at the minute, and we're probably averaging 6 to 7 per week across the 8 developments. And it's a challenge. My sales team are often phoning me on a weekend to ask what deals can be done on properties. But we're certainly seeing some more encouraging signs. Again, we'll see what comes out post-budget. But the stamp duty change at the end of March, we think there'll probably be a bit of an increase before then. And then we hope to then be on more developments, more sites, more outlets, to then enable us to maintain a level of sales throughout the rest of the year and going forward.
Does that resonate with you, Adam? Is that where you are?
Pretty much, yeah. I think you're saying that your sales team asking for deals to be done. I think we see that the equivalent to that is price sensitivity with our buyers, and trying to put deals together now in comparison to what you experienced during the COVID market, where prices were rising more quickly than perhaps people were able to save, and you could put the property on the market within reason at a price that was ambitious, and people would make offers purely to try and get a foot on the ladder and secure a property. Whereas I think the past couple of years have made people, well, it's affected people's affordability and ability to proceed, but I think it's just made people more cautious. And so now, unless we're pricing properties kind of on the nose or really competitively, then sellers are finding the market to be very slow, and the levels of viewings can be really, really low. So yeah, you really need to put yourself out there and be competitive in order to draw the interest in.
And is there a difference between, do you think, how a smaller house builder should market themselves to say someone a dance company's size?
Yeah, well, I think the main difference comes down to the ability to produce like good quality show homes. If you're dealing with a smaller developer and they don't have other sites they can send potential buyers through to, or they don't have a show home on site, you're not. The sales process isn't much different to selling any other resale property on the open market. And what a lot of smaller developers try and do is sell them off plan or during the construction phase, which isn't kind of much different to trying to sell a house partway through an extension or something. Like if it was on the resale market, you're asking a buyer to have a lot of vision, think in a way that some of the bigger builders would be able to show them some examples and help with the visualization of it. So yeah, we're advising smaller developers to focus more on building up waiting lists and anticipation for launch of properties, rather than trying to sell them in the off plan or during the construction phase, which is probably very different to.
Well, funnily enough, it's not actually. What we're seeing now is so many more people want to see it, touch it, understand where the sofa's going to go, the TV, rather than looking at it from a 2D plan perspective. The big focus for us now is getting the interior finished, so it is almost a stock plot for them, which is not what we've had, as I say, post-COVID, and even before then. The number of units you'd sell off plan certainly increased, but now we're seeing, because there is more availability in the market, as you say, unless people are pricing it bang on the nose, people are looking at, do I buy a second hand or do I buy a brand new one? They've got more choice to make, and a lot of it always comes back to that key word of affordability.
Okay. We've heard a lot over the last few years about sort of housing crisis. Is there a housing crisis, Dan, do you think? And if there is, well, you know, how you obviously want to build more houses, right? What's stopping you doing that? Is it planning? Is it skills? What is it? Availability of land?
It's probably a combination of several of the above, because when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, you know, the councils are doing the best they can with the resource that they have. You know, it'd be unfair to sit here and say it purely sits because of planners, because that's not the case. It's a case of us having to work with the local authorities, build those relationships. We deal with, you know, a few in the area, you know, mainly the Hinckley and Bosworths and Charnwoods, people like that, whereby I'll have sat with the head of the council to go through what our aspirations are, because they have housing targets to hit and they want to know who's going to help them deliver it. Skill shortages, we've certainly seen a decrease in that, and we as Persimmon are looking to help with that with apprenticeship schemes, because it's the best way to work it is to get people back in or drive them into the system of either being on site or being within our offices. You know, we do it from QSs, from our technical departments, from sales teams, but also out on site with our trades as well, and giving people that understanding of what the industry actually is. You can learn a trade. You can be a bricklayer. You can be a carpenter. You know, my construction director is a former bricklayer, so he started on the tools, been out on the sites for a long time, but then has transitioned into site management and is now construction director. So your skill set can start you off and take you into different roles as you go. But the actual housing crisis, as they'll say, affordability is the main one for second-hand and new build. Ours, from the actual build side, is we've got to invest in getting people into the market to actually build them for us. Land, you know, I don't know who keeps abreast of what the CMA were were accusing developers of. And obviously after their investigation they found that, funnily enough, developers, when they spend money on land, we do like to get our money back. And that's what our big push is for. It's getting the deals done on land. There is land availability because all the councils have 5-year plans and beyond. So our drive is to push, as I say, where we were before, 600 units roughly per region, to get back to that. But as I say, it's not one element that you can pinpoint and say it's exactly that. It's several points that large developers like ourselves and other developers that are out there as well have got a key focus on to try and help with that.
Yeah. Do you think, Adam?
It's interesting to, I mean, at the start there you asked about, is there a housing crisis? And it really does come down to who you ask, because I think there's like a really acute need for certain types of properties in specific locations, and but then you could have sites with plots that are completed and waiting for the right buyer, and it's just about price sensitivity. So I think it's just every part of the supply chain or the industry's got a slightly different perspective on it, and most people do revert back to the planning aspect. But if you look at if you try and take a step back from all of these different perspectives, all these different issues, I think the one thing it does perhaps all boil down to is the lack of a more long-term strategy that deals with all of these things. And like, you only need to look at the amount of housing ministers we've had over the past 14 years, or to get an idea for the fact that no one's really taken ownership on trying to put a plan in place that might see us through for the next 2 decades. And I think that flip-flopping of approaches and need to grab headlines is probably part of the problem, without anyone putting a longer term plan in place where it's stuck to and delivered on. So yeah, I
think throwing numbers out there, because a buzz number of $1.5 million in 5 years, it's 300,000 a year on average, which is, if you look at it on a weekly basis, it's just under 6,000 a week that have got to be delivered. I go out and we buy a site, might be for 200 houses, and to sell them in a normal market, as I'll call it, you might be on there for 4 years. So that's 50 a year out of the fact that they need to be delivering that many thousands per week. It's just it's the longer term strategy of how we get to that point. It sounds a good number. It's then how we actually deliver that, and it's that longer term. It's not going to happen now in office, but you're probably looking at 18 months to 2 years before you start seeing things bearing fruit. It's not an instant fix. And
that output's got to increase massively from the kind of 170,000, 180,000 units that is that about right that are going up at the minute. And you mentioned about the kind of skills gap and so many other factors that have got to come together to deliver it. It just seems like it's nothing's going to change anytime soon, I guess.
No, that's the thing. To deliver that many, you've got to have the infrastructure behind it. I don't just mean roads and utilities. It's everything, like you say, to close out the skills gap and actually have the people to deliver it, be it planning officers and planners or bricklayers and electricians. There's so many fronts it's got to be fought on. But as I say, it's for people in the property industry to be trying to drive that, and that's what Persimmon and other builders alike are trying to do.
Adam, we hear a lot about placemaking and good design and the rest of it. How important? Hold on. How important do you think that is to buyers, and how important do you think it is to developers?
I think it is really important to buyers. And
does it just come down to price?
Price is always going to be the main factor, but I think buyers would have much more of an appetite, or maybe willing to pay slightly more, if I'm not pointing the finger at you, by the way, Dan, but the bigger developers were more creative in their approach with their designs for these bigger developments. Like, I don't know, it'd be great to see some, Scandinavian-inspired designs, or look to Europe for a bit of inspiration and be a bit more creative. Because if you look historically, we've got such a rich history of architectural design, and it seems like this drive for just output of units has lost a bit of that creativity, because it doesn't matter where you go in the country, but you see very similar sorts of things. And I think if there was new developments going up that were really inspiring and different, it would certainly ease the sensitivity on price, because people want to secure something that really stood out, was a bit different. And so, yeah, personally, I'd like to see a bit more creativity when it comes to design.
But again, it comes down to price on the other side for you, doesn't it? Of how much materials cost.
There's always that factor when you're considering buying a parcel of land, that there's again all these elements that go into it. But ultimately, if we are providing a better place to live, then that should give you the opportunity to amend what you're going to end up with a final sales value. So we've got a site just over 3,000 houses at Garendon, which is just north of Loughborough, and within that I've got, as part of the 106, I've got millions of pounds to be spent on refurbing historic monuments within there, because it's Garendon Park was privately owned, and if you went on there without permission, I think you were chased off by the gamekeeper with his shotgun. But the first iteration of works we've had to do on there is open up this parkland by the 50th occupation. That's 50 of over 3,000 houses, is to give the people that are moving into there not just the sense of purpose of what you've tried to sell them as the long-term objective of the development, but to then have the buy-in of the local residents who probably objected against the development in the first place, but ultimately they were never allowed in there because it was private land. So it's how we incorporate all of that into our development, because the first phase that we're on is just over 200 houses, but I'm not selling 200 houses at Garendon Park. I'm selling over 3,000 in the long term. So I've got to make sure that is a desirable place that people want to live, be that via design or amenities that are on there. Your dog walks are on your doorstep. But it opens it up then that it's not a standalone parcel, it's then incorporated in the existing developments and houses that are there that have been built 50, 60 years, because by bringing that forward, they're then benefiting from it as well. And that's again got to be our focus on it. No longer can we go with the what you've probably seen of potato stamping and box bashing, as it was often called, because people nowadays, there's that much variation out there in choice that they don't want to live in the same house that looks over their neighbours that looks exactly the same. So we've got to be more inspired in our design to attract the customers who want to buy from us.
What's the appetite for developers of your size for building on brownfield land?
I'm actually on a brownfield site at the minute in Burbage. That was a former factory. Having got inside the factory, we then found a nice pit of whatever it was in the ground that they'd been using. So there's a lot of remediation that needed to be done with it. But ultimately, we're happy to take it on. I've got another site at Melton that's just going through the planning process again. Small scheme, part of our Charles Church range, which is currently a transport yard. You can't always be going out there on green fields. We've got to incorporate brownfield developments. It's just whether the brownfield sites deliver the housing need that's needed for the local area.
I was going to say, Adam, does the origins of a site matter to a buyer?
Not particularly, no, I don't think so. The buyers are looking for, they're wanting to buy in locations that have got the infrastructure, the amenities, they've got a reason to want to live in the local area. So I think if that delivers and they can find a property that at the right price for them, that's the priority. As long as a compelling option for them to purchase, then yeah, they'll sell.
Okay, let's talk about the budget. We've only got half an hour, so
I'll give you the short version.
Yeah. How will it affect how you market your properties?
I think the big thing for us as a estate and letting agency is the increase in the STIR charge on the stamp duty paid for additional properties. I think that was just another factor that current and potential landlords will have to consider when they're kind of looking to purchase properties, and that's going to have a direct impact to the supply of new rental stock in the market, which is another facet of the housing crisis and something that's going to limit demand and kind of make it less attractive for people to enter the market, which is exactly the opposite of what we need at the minute for the rental market. So that was frustrating. I think I mean, we'd only had a couple of deals fall through. It wasn't like it had an immediate catastrophic impact, but it's just part of a narrative that's built up with a perspective that society and potential landlords now have of just making it as unattractive as possible to become a landlord. And it's a shame to see it going the other way. I think personally, it would have been, not that this would have happened, but I want to see something that like to help the tenants that we're speaking to on a daily basis that are struggling to secure properties and experiencing huge surges in rental prices. They just want more choice and landlords to have a bit of competition. And yeah, there's nothing happening and to make that sort of change. And the budget with this change in the stamp duty is another example of it's just going in completely the wrong direction.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we were, as probably a lot of people in the room are hoping, there was going to be more for housing within the budget. You know, the Help to Buy scheme from a few years ago was really beneficial. It's still live in Wales, so you look at it and think, well, why not in England as well? But ultimately, they're the cards that have been dealt for now. We will work with what we've got to deal with. Again, I keep saying the word affordability. People are going to have to work that in when they actually come from the end of March next year to their calculations. We'll have to work that into our calculations in terms of what we can do to help the buyers with the additional costs that come with it. We had a few deals that overnight suddenly increased because they were buying second, third properties, investor deals. So we had to deal with that pretty promptly. But I think at the minute it's too early to say if there's going to be anything more that's going to be coming our way to help us. As I say, I think 18 months, 2 years is when you're going to get to a point of whether we're kind of carrying on this road or whether they are going to realise something and do something more for us, because it's such an assistance with the general running of the country, as we saw during COVID with builds still happening. There's so much money within the construction and housing sector that something has to be done to support it. It's just not happened right now like we'd hoped.
Okay. Just finally from me, I wanted to ask you about your new manufacturing site. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Is this new news?
It's not breaking news, I'm afraid. No, sorry, it's not an exclusive. Yeah, so as part of Persimmon overall, we have a company called Space 4 who manufacture timber frames, smart roofs for our 2.5-storey properties, and then insulated panels. So as we move forward in the change in building regs, we're going to be looking more at the fabric first, and there's going to be a loss of gas boilers. Again, waiting on those dates to come forward from the new government, but we anticipate it to be future home spec from a point in 2026. So there'll be a real turn to timber frame manufacturing. So we gained planning permission on our Garendon site on the commercial land there for a new Space 4 factory. So that's going to bring in circa £30-40 million worth of infrastructure delivery to deliver the factory, and then jobs for the local area. It was, for once, a less than contentious planning application because of the ability to deliver more timber frames to us on site at Garendon and then to the wider area for Persimmon. That actually it was welcomed with open arms by the local authority, which was great for us. We, as my region, looking to start the infrastructure early next year. Again, that's £20 million worth of infra to be delivered on top of the factory build. But what it will do is allow our business, which at the minute from its factory delivers just over 3,000 frames or roofs for the Persimmon group, to then significantly upscale from there. So yeah, it's going to be quite an undertaking in the next couple of years, but yeah, we're really hopeful it's going to help us deliver up the M1 corridor. You know, some of what goes from Birmingham at the minute is up into our Scotland division. So it's really going to kind of help us push forward on the fabric first approach.
Good news. Right, any questions for Adam and Dan, or Dan? Look at the job you've done. Amazing.
Is everyone still awake?
Anything.
Tom,
Yeah.
thank you, Tom.
This one's for Dan mainly. I'd be interested to know your views on the kind of the government grey belt policy and whether that's had any kind of, has any thought put behind it. It seems like it's something that maybe a SPAD came up with in the back of a taxi with 5 minutes notice.
Yeah, the grey belt policy that they released to us,
What's the grey belt policy?
it's not quite green belt.
It's not quite brown.
It's not quite brownfield, so it's kind of, it's perfectly in between. So the idea is to increase the delivery of houses. There's much contention comes from delivering on green belt, but it's basically agricultural areas that aren't fully classified as green belt land. So I would say, I won't call it a buzz term, but it's something that, again, delivers this idea that this is what's going to get us to 300,000 a year. And it's not just in my view, it's not like a one-size-fits-all. We can't just base it on, we'll go for grey belt and that's going to get you to 300,000. As I said earlier, there's that many different strings to that bow to get us to deliver to that. It'll be interesting to see how it actually develops as we go forward, as I say, in the next year to 2 years with these applications going through. Recent applications for large-scale sites, one was just called in last week for several thousand houses before it went to, not for us, but for a refusal, for it to be re-reviewed to see actually what's the harm versus the positive. So again, things are starting to happen, and I think it'll go more and more in the next year or so that we'll start seeing what they actually define as grey belt. And how it's going to benefit all of us in delivering more units.
Do you want to come in on that, Adam?
I mean, my only thought about that is, I suppose they're using it as a way to open up these areas of land that previously would have perhaps been lower down in a priority.
Yep. Yeah.
And they're doing that while simultaneously there's probably a lot more opportunity in areas that wouldn't be affecting our nice countryside, like the better use of publicly owned land or empty properties and high density stuff in like Leicester city centre, for example. I think there's loads of potential there, but then these things are all linked to each other, aren't they? Because to make that a success and make sure there's demand, there needs to be much more investment into the city centre in terms of infrastructure and economic opportunities and stuff. So it kind of it swings and roundabouts. It's just a shame that the countryside is prioritised over where perhaps there's much more obvious potential.
Anybody else? Yeah.
A question for Dan. It seems like the government are kind of squeezing landlords and kind of trying to push small landlords kind of out of operating, essentially. There's going to be a shortage of investment properties and properties to rent. And do you think Persimmon or other competitors may venture into actually building to rent rather than to sell?
Yeah, it's a good question. We as a business have got to diversify. We were originally our main client base would have been first-time buyers. So now we've got to look at the alternates. So we are already looking at the opportunities with some larger PRS providers, and then build to rent as well in our future plans. We're looking at sites that are purely affordable developments and partnering up with affordable housing providers to actually build on their behalf, like so many other developers you see are doing at the minute, because it's about trying to deliver houses in the right location at an affordable price for people. So we can't just sit here and say, well, we want to make X amount of money and this is the way we're going to do it, and then sit on the other hand and say, but we want to be part of how we grow and invest in the industry to bring people into it and get people onto the house buying ladder. So we've had to diversify our approach on how we deliver these things. So yeah, we are already in conversations across, because we are countrywide. Certain areas are already delivering those, and other areas are in discussion with people, either with affordable housing providers or build-to-rent providers.
Yeah.
So the first-time buyers have had diversify and help to buy to help them. So would you say, Dan, is there a need for such a scheme, and if so, what form should that scheme look like?
Yeah, as I touched on earlier, Help to Buy was a massive, provided a massive influx of the availability for people who own their property. I think there was circa 400,000 houses sold through it. So for it to be it to end was disappointing, especially like I say with it still being pulled through in Wales. There's been no talk of it being brought back. There's again conversations being had in the background of what something might look like as a funding scheme, and that's where we're having to diversify what we're doing with the public market and the private market. But yeah, it certainly provided everyone the ability to get on to the property ladder, and we've seen such a shift in our the dynamic of what we're selling. So we're now a lot of people are seeming to downsize into some of our bigger 4 and 5 bedders. Before, as I said earlier, the first time buyers in the 2s and 3 beds were our main client source. So yeah, it really kind of was a kick in the guts when it ended, just because it then got to this point whereby the affordability for people wasn't quite there anymore. And with everything going up, land values, material costs, everything like that, as always with anything, we all see it in the shops when we go and do the food shops. The material costs go up, so the end cost goes up with it, and that really did help people take that step forward.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Well, thank you both very much. That was interesting. I learnt a lot there. I'm never moving again because I moved 18 months ago and I'm still scarred from it. Thanks to Dan from Persimmon. Thanks to Adam from Hortons. Go and see Adam's team down there. They're excellent. Please go and have a word with them. Thank you all for coming. And we've got the room for the next half an hour or so. Bar's still open, I think. If you want to have a chat, please do hang around. Thanks to John and his team for hosting today. Okay, see you all again. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Nice one. I enjoyed that. Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.